It's chapter 14 of The Giver. In chapter 13, Jonas is beginning to get frustrated and angry that he can't see colors all the time and no one else can, because it would make the world a bit more interesting and it would give them choices. The Giver goes to explain that when you give humans choices, they make mistakes, and these mistakes have consequences. So that's why in this community they get rid of the hills because they make transportation difficult. They got rid of the sun because of the sunburn. They even got rid of snow because they can't grow vegetables in the snow. So that's why they took away the ability for people to make choices and to see things differently. At the end, Jonas wants to help the Giver get rid of some of the pain that he has from all of these memories, from the memories of the whole world. And so he asks him to give him a painful memory. So the Giver tells him, we're going to look at the one with the snow and the sled. Chapter 14. It was much the same, this memory, though the hill seemed to be a different one, steeper, and the snow was not falling as thickly as it had before, so there's less snow. It was colder also, Jonas perceived. He could see, as he sat waiting at the top of the hill, that the snow beneath the sled was not thick and soft as it had been before, but hard and coated with ice, with bluish ice. So you go a lot faster. The sled moved forward and Jonas grinned with delight, looking forward to the breathtaking slide down through the invigorating air. But the runners this time couldn't slice through the frozen expanse as they had on the other snow-cushioned hill. They skidded sideways and the sled gathered speed. Jonas pulled at the rope, trying to steer, but the steepness and speed took control from his hands, and he was no longer enjoying the feeling of freedom, but instead, terrified, was at the mercy of the wild acceleration downward over the ice. Sideways spinning, the sled hit a bump in the hill, and Jonas was jarred loose and thrown violently into the air. He fell with his leg twisted under him and could hear the crack of bone. His face scraped along jagged edges of ice, and when he came at last to a stop, he lay shocked and still feeling nothing at first but fear. Then the first wave of pain. He gasped. It was as if an axe and hatchet lay lodged in his leg, slicing through each nerve with a hot blade, a knife. In his pain and agony, he perceived the word fire and felt flames licking at the torn bone and flesh. He tried to move and could not. The pain grew. He screamed. There was no answer. Crying and sobbing, he turned his head and vomited, was sick on the frozen snow, blood dripping from his face into the vomit. No! He cried, and the sound disappeared into the empty landscape, into the wind. Then suddenly, he was in the annex room again, writhing on the bed. His face was wet with tears from crying. Able to move now, he rocked his own body back and forth, breathing deeply to release the remembered pain. He sat and looked at his own leg, where it lay straight on the bed, unbroken. The brutal slice of pain was gone, but the leg hurt, ached horribly still, and his face felt raw. "May I have relief of pain, please?" he begged. It was always provided in his everyday life for the bruises and wounds, for a mashed finger, a stomachache, a skinned knee from a fall from a bike. There was always a dab of anesthetic ointment, or a pill, or in severe incidents, an injection that brought complete and instantaneous deliverance, so an injection that you could not feel anything. But the Giver said no and looked away. Limping, Jonas walked home, pushing his bicycle that evening. The sunburn had been so small in comparison and not stayed with him, but this ache lingered. So it was the memory of someone going down the same sled, but faster on ice. They fall, they break their leg, and now this is the pain that Jonas has from the memory. It was not unendurable, as the pain on the hill had been. Jonas tried to be brave. He remembered that the chief elder said that he was brave. "Is something wrong, Jonas?" his father asked at the evening meal. "You're so quiet tonight. Aren't you feeling well? Would you like some medication?" But Jonas remembered the rules. No medication for anything related to his training. and no discussion or talking of his training. At the time, for sharing of feelings, he simply said that he felt tired, that his school lessons had been unusually demanding and difficult that day. He went to his sleeping room early, and from behind the closed door he could hear his parents and sister laughing as they gave Gabriel his evening bath. They have never known pain, he thought. The realization made him feel desperately lonely, and he rubbed his throbbing and painful leg. He eventually slept again, and again he dreamed of the anguish and the isolation, the scariness on the forsaken hill. So perhaps one of the reasons why they have a receiver of memories is to take away those painful memories that people could have. The daily training continued, and now it always included pain. The agony of the fractured and broken leg seemed no more than a mild discomfort as the giver led Jonas firmly, little by little, into the deep and terrible suffering of the past. Each time in his kindness, the giver ended the afternoon with a colour-filled memory of pleasure. A brisk sail on a blue-green lake, a meadow dotted with yellow wildflowers, an orange sunset behind mountains. So the giver's giving him painful memories and ending the day with a nice one with colours. It was not enough to assuage the pain that Jonas was beginning now to know. Why? Jonas asked him after he had received a torturous memory in which he had been neglected, left and unfed, no food. The hunger had caused excruciating, very painful spasms in his empty, distended stomach. He lay on the bed, aching in pain. Why do you and I have to hold these memories? It gives us wisdom, the giver replied. Without wisdom, I could not fulfill my function, my job of advising the committee of elders when they call upon me. But what wisdom do you get from hunger? Jonas groaned. His stomach still hurt, though the memory had ended. Some years ago, the giver told him, before your birth, a lot of citizens petitioned the committee of elders. They wanted to increase the rate of births, the amount of babies. They wanted each birth mother to be assigned 4 births instead of 3, so that the population would increase and there would be more laborers available. Jonas nodded, listening. Well, that makes sense. The idea was that certain family units could accommodate an additional child. Jonas nodded again. Mine could, he pointed out. We have Gabriel this year, and it's fun having a 3rd child. The committee of elders sought or looked for my advice, the giver said. It made sense to them too, but it was a new idea, and they came to me for wisdom. And you used your memories? The giver said, yes. And the strongest memory that came was hunger. It came from many, many generations back, centuries, over hundreds of years back. The population had gotten so big, the amount of people had gotten so big, that hunger was everywhere, excruciating hunger and starvation. It was followed by warfare. Warfare? It was a concept, something that Jonas did not know, but hunger was familiar to him now. Unconsciously, he rubbed his own belly, his abdomen, recalling the pain of its unfulfilled needs. So you describe that to them? They don't want to hear about pain. They just seek the advice. I simply advised them against increasing the population. But you said that was before my birth. They hardly ever come to you for advice, only when what was it you said? When they have a problem that they've never faced or seen before? When did it happen last? Do you remember the day when the plane flew over the community, which was in chapter 1? Yes, I was scared. Well, so were they. They were prepared to shoot it down, but they came and sought for my advice. I told them to wait. But how did you know? How did you know that the pilot was lost? I didn't. I used my wisdom from the memories. I knew that there had been times in the past, terrible times, when people had destroyed others in haste, in anger, in fear, and had brought about their own destruction. Jonas realized something. That means, he said slowly, that you have memories of destruction, and you have to give them to me too, because I have to get the wisdom. The giver nodded. But it will hurt, Jonas said. It wasn't a question. It will hurt terribly, the giver agreed. But why can't everyone have the memories? I think it would seem a little easier if the memories were shared. You and I wouldn't have to bear so much by ourselves if everybody took a part. The giver sighed. You're right, he said, but then everyone would be burdened and pained. They don't want that, and that's the real reason the receiver is so important, vital to them, and so honoured. They selected me and you to lift that burden from themselves. When did they decide that? Jonas asked angrily. It wasn't fair. Let's change it. And how do you suggest we do that? I've never been able to think of a way, and I'm supposed to be the one with all of the wisdom. But there are two of us now, Jonas said eagerly. Together we can think of something. The giver watched him with a weary smile. Why can't we just apply for a change of rules? Jonas suggested. The giver laughed. Then Jonas, too, chuckled reluctantly. The decision was made long before my time or yours, the giver said, and before the previous receiver, and, he waited, back and back and back, Jonas repeated the familiar phrase. Sometimes it had seemed funny, humorous to him. Sometimes it had seemed meaningful and important. Now it was ominous. It meant he knew that nothing could be changed. The new child Gabriel was growing and successfully passed the tests of maturity that the nurturers gave each month. He could sit alone now, could reach for and grasp small play objects, and he had 6 teeth. During the daytime hours, Father reported he was cheerful and seemed of normal intelligence. But he remained fretful at night, crying, whimpering often, needing frequent or constant attention. After all this extra time I've put in with him, Father said one evening after Gabriel had been bathed and was lying for the moment hugging his hippo placidly in the small crib that had replaced the basket. I hope they're not going to decide to release him. Maybe it would be for the best, Mother suggested. I know you don't mind getting up with him at night, but the lack of sleep is awfully hard for me. If they release Gabriel, can we get another new child as a visitor? Asked Lily. She was kneeling beside the crib, making funny faces at the little one, who was smiling back at her. Jonas's mother rolled her eyes in dismay. No, Father said, smiling. He moved Lily's hair. It's very rare anyway that a new child's status is as uncertain as Gabriel's. It probably won't happen again for a long time. Anyway, he sighed, they won't make the decision for a while. Right now, we're all preparing for a release. We'll probably have to make very soon. There's a birth mother who's expecting twin males next month. Oh dear, Mother said, shaking her head. If they're identical, I hope you're not the one assigned. I am. I'm next on the list. I'll have to select the one to be nurtured and the one to be released. It's usually not hard though. Usually it's just a matter of birth weight. We release the smaller of the two. Again, remember in this community, they don't like things to be different. They don't want twins, two of the same. They want the strongest one, and they release the other one. Jonas listened, though, thought suddenly about the bridge, and how, standing there, he had wondered what lay elsewhere. Elsewhere means outside of the community. Was there someone there, waiting, who would receive the tiny released twin? Would it grow up elsewhere, not knowing ever that in this community lived a being, someone who looked exactly the same as him? For a moment he felt a tiny fluttering hope that he knew was quite foolish. He hoped that it would be Larissa waiting. Larissa, the old woman he had bathed. He remembered her sparkling eyes, her soft voice, her low chuckle. Fiona had told him recently that Larissa had been released at a wonderful ceremony. But he knew that the old were not given children to raise. Larissa's life elsewhere would be quiet and serene as befit the old. She would not welcome the responsibility of nurturing a new child who needed feeding and care and would likely cry at night. Mother, Father, he said, the idea coming to him unexpectedly, why don't we put Gabriel's crib in my room tonight? I know how to feed and comfort him, and it would let you and Father get some sleep. Father looked doubtful. You sleep so soundly, so deep, Jonas. What if his restlessness didn't wake you? It was Lily who answered that. If no one goes to tend Gabriel, she pointed out, he gets very loud. He would wake all of us if Jonas slept through it. Father laughed. You're right, Lily Billy. All right, Jonas, let's try it, just for tonight. I'll take the night off and we'll let Mother get some sleep too. Gabriel slept soundly, very well for the earliest part of the night. Jonas in his bed lay awake for a while. From time to time he raised himself on one elbow, looking over at the crib. The new child was on his stomach, his arms relaxed beside his head, his eyes closed, and his breathing regular and undisturbed. Finally, Jonas slept too. Then, as the middle hours of the night approached, the noise of Gabe's restlessness woke Jonas. The new child was turning under his cover, flailing his arms and beginning to whimper and cry. Jonas got up, he rose and went to him. Gently he patted Gabriel's back. Sometimes that was all it took to lull him back to sleep. But the new child still squirmed and moved fretfully under his hand. Still patting rhythmically, Jonas began to remember the wonderful sail that the giver had given him not long before. A bright, windy, breezy day on a clear turquoise blue lake, and above him the white sail of the boat billowing as he moved along in the brisk wind. He was not aware of giving the memory, but suddenly he realized that it was becoming dimmer, that it was sliding through his hand into the being of the new child. Gabriel became quiet. Startled, Jonas pulled back what was left of the memory with a burst of will. He removed his hand from the little back and stood quietly beside the crib. So Jonas can give memories as well now. The same way that the old man, the giver, gives him, he just did that to Gabriel. To himself, he called the memory of the sail forward again. It was still there, but the sky was less blue, the gentle motion of the boat slower, the water of the lake more murky and clouded. He kept the memory for a while, soothing his own nervousness at what had occurred, then let it go and returned to his bed. Once more, toward the morning, the new child woke and cried out. Again, Jonas went to him. This time, he quite deliberately placed his hand firmly, strongly on Gabriel's back and released the rest of the calming, relaxing day on the lake. Again, Gabriel slept. But now Jonas lay awake thinking. He no longer had any more than a wisp of the memory, because when you give the memory, you lose that memory. And he felt a small lack where it had been. He could ask the giver for another sail, he knew. A sail perhaps on ocean next time, for Jonas had a memory of ocean now and knew what it was. He knew that there were sailboats there too, in memories yet to be given or acquired. He wondered, though, if he should confess to the giver that he had given a memory away. He was not yet qualified to be a giver himself, nor had Gabriel been selected to be a receiver. That he had this power frightened him. He decided not to tell. Wow, so in this chapter, the giver gives Jonas one of the difficult memories to show Jonas why being the receiver is so difficult and you must be brave. And basically he goes down a slope on a sled in snow, but this time he falls off, he breaks his leg, and it's very painful. He also experiences hunger, what it's like to be starving, and he is explained by the giver about why they don't give the memories away. But Jonas thinks that if everyone had the memories, then everyone would feel the same. In the end of the chapter, he ends up helping Gabriel, the baby, fall asleep by giving Gabriel a nice, relaxing memory. We'll find out what happens in the next chapter. This is the end of the chapter.